To Energy Now, a weekly look at America's energy challenges and what we're doing about them. The Obama administration has lifted its controversial moratorium on deepwater drilling that was put in place after the Gulf oil spill. There are new regulations now requiring safer drilling equipment and better preparations to handle accidents. One place where those rules may be tested quickly, the Chukchi and Beaufort Seas off Alaska's North Slope, where Shell holds drilling leases. The area around the Chukchi is home to Inupiat tribes who have hunted and fished those waters for centuries and fear they will lose their way of life to the drilling. Dan Goldstein traveled to Alaska to look at whether today's oil drilling can coexist with ancient ways in this Energy Now Spotlight.
This is fried whale steak, breaded whale steaks.
Wow.
And this is from a whale.
In the village of Point Hope, Alaska, nearly everything on your plate comes from the garden, the bounty of sea and land. Here, just making a family dinner from this garden is an effort for Mossick Lane.
For the bigger things, we use the saw. This cuts the fish and the caribou bones or anything.
Lane is an Inupiat. Her ancestors have called this home for more than 3,000 years. Living off the land and sea is a way of life, as there are no roads in or out. Whaling is the center of this Spartan life. Each spring, the community hunts whale in the frigid waters off Point Hope. Just one 50-ton bowhead whale can feed the entire town of 700 for a year.
Every crew has its individual name and a CB call when they see whales coming, and they can communicate so someone can know to cease fire and not scare the whale.
Eugene Brower is a whaling captain. He's been hunting whales since he was 8.
When this penetrates into the whale, 3 seconds later, set the whale, it explodes.
Now, if you do it right, you could kill it instantly.
Just with one shot.
But the Inupiat fear their days of traditional hunting could be numbered. Point Hope lies on the coast of the Chukchi Sea. Under it,
25 to 27 billion barrels of oil, 120 trillion cubic feet of gas.
Pete Slaby heads Shell's drilling operations in Alaska. In 2008, Shell paid the federal government more than $2 billion for the right to drill off Point Hope starting next year. Slaby says despite the remoteness of the Arctic, drilling will be much safer compared to the Gulf.
Will we see a spill like we've seen in Macondo? And I think the answer to that is no. We do not have that volume. We do not have that water depth.
The remoteness of Point Hope has always been part of its beauty, but that remoteness is its biggest worry as well. It takes airplanes like these to move anything in or out. And when it comes to an oil spill, it's that remoteness that it's the biggest worry.
We're way out here. How are they going to bring the equipment? The second thing is the ocean is aggressive, and it can be, and with the ice flows, I'm sure it can just rip through something that they thought may be able to hold.
One of the large assets actually will spend the winter in Alaska this year, the Nanook, a 300-foot ice-classed oil spill response vessel, most modern in the world, that can work in ice, deploy a massive amount of recovery equipment.
And it's not just a potential spill that has residents uneasy. Natives fear that even Shell's initial seismic mapping of the oil field, which uses small explosive charges, will cause the whales to veer away from the noise, making them harder to catch.
It will deflect the migration route. Any noise in front of it will deflect the bowhead whale out from the migration route. So it goes out, it'll start deflecting 20, 25 miles away from the source. Starts coming out, goes on, goes around it. There goes that way of life.
We have altered our routes so we actually travel away from coastal areas to keep the pressure off seals, walrus, coastal animals.
The oil industry is not our enemy.
Edward Ida is the mayor of Barrow, the largest town on the North Slope. Here, only 20% of the residents depend on whaling for food. That's because Barrow sits surrounded by oil fields. There are restaurants, taxi cabs, banks, and tourists eager to see life at the top of the world.
Our standard of living has improved dramatically, as well as the health, due to our ability to have the good fortune to be able to tax the oil industry.
That good fortune comes in the form of a check to every Alaskan. Every man, woman, and child gets a share of the state's take from oil and gas royalties. But with onshore oil depleting, down more than 65% from the 1980s, the annual payouts will shrink unless new drilling begins. And the final decision over new offshore drilling is mainly in the hands of the federal government.
Thank you so much.
The Obama administration backed oil drilling offshore, only to put new drilling permits on hold after the Gulf disaster. Interior Secretary Ken Salazar came to Barrow in September to talk drilling plans and to hear residents' concerns.
Shell wants us to move forward and to make some quick decisions. We're not going to be rushed. We're going to make the right decisions as we chart the way forward.
Back in Point Hope, Mossack Lane is working in the city office. First up, fixing the rundown rec center for the 200-plus children in town. It's a challenge. The city's total budget is just $200,000. Fixing the rec center will cost thousands, but might be more affordable if the town had oil industry revenue coming in, like Barrow.
Between the young folks, they might be split down the middle because some do want development here. They want to have swimming pools and other recreational activities which we don't have and cannot provide.
Well, there's other communities that are really ready to welcome oil companies in because it will bring some infrastructure. It will mean that they get fresh milk. It will mean that they get fresh vegetables and fruit and meat and a lot of other things that are just difficult to get out there.
Mossack Lane says she's torn. Oil revenue could pay for a rec center, but she worries about a spill destroying her community.
That would lose everything else they even had. Right now, they're rich with the subsistence. The freezers are full with the subsistence foods, and may not have lots of money, but lots of love and food. And the choice they're being faced with is either to choose their garden or choose the money.
On the north slope of Alaska, Dan Goldstein, Energy Now.
The Obama administration's National Oil Commission says Shell's Alaska spill response plan goes beyond what's required, but said extreme weather could still hamper a cleanup and that oil trapped underneath ice sheets could be problematic. Shell has postponed plans to drill in the Chukchi Sea next year while legal issues are resolved, but it still wants to drill an exploratory well in shallow waters in the Beaufort Sea off Alaska next June. Well, here to talk offshore drilling and more in the mix is Frank Massano. He's a principal at the law firm Bracewell & Giuliani. From New York, Peter Lehner, executive director of the Natural Resources Defense Council and author of a new book, In Deep Water, which is about offshore drilling. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
So the White House lifts this moratorium. Drilling is not expected to resume anytime soon. I want to listen right now to a comment from the director of the Bureau of Ocean and Energy Management, Michael Bromwich, and then we'll talk about that.
We know that you're never going to be able to reduce the risk to zero. I think there was a false sense before Deepwater Horizon that the risks had been reduced to zero. So we need to be realistic about this and recognize that that's never going to happen. But we do believe that the new safety enhancements that we put in place through NTL 5, through NTL 6, and through the interim final rule raise the bar significantly enough that we can and the American public should feel safe.
Peter, we have now this higher bar for safety. Bromwich told Energy Now this past week, we know enough that drilling can resume. Is that reasonable for you?
Well, the new rules are much better than they were before. Our concern is we probably still don't know all what happened and what caused the spill. In fact, we have 3 commissions, the President's Commission, the Coast Guard, the National Academy of Engineering, and they're all looking at trying to really understand what happened to the spill. So it seems that a continued pause for another month or so until these reports come out would give us a much greater level of confidence than we have right now.
Right. I mean, Frank, the investigations are ongoing. Why not?
I think what's certain is that we are going to be waiting. Shallow water drillers, for instance, have been off moratorium since May 28th, and permits for shallow water drilling have been few and far in between. In fact, recently, we've had a flurry of shallow water permits almost 5 months after the initial permits, the initial moratorium came off shallow water drillers. So there's no doubt in my mind that there will be a de facto moratorium in place anyway.
But Frank, what about, we saw Dan's piece, what about these pristine areas of Alaska? What about the drilling in the Chukchi Sea? The Gulf is one thing.
Well, certainly the Gulf and Alaska are two separate things. Shallow water and deep water are two separate things. So what we're looking at is the possibility of the Obama administration looking at each of these situations in a tiered approach, in a risk-based approach. And as they consider those policies under a risk-based approach, taking drilling decisions in permit time and time to move the permits more quickly in cases where they're not there's not as much risk to the drilling.
Peter?
Right, and I agree with that. I think oil is very valuable stuff, and really the first thing we need to think about is not wasting it. Right now we're wasting huge amounts of it in gas-guzzling cars and everywhere else. I think right behind me is the Empire State Building. If that were a national gas tank, we'd fill it up 3 times a day with the oil this country uses. So there has been good movement, and the president, the administration has been moving forward to increase the efficiency of our cars and trucks. But where we drill, it's just a question of risk versus benefits. And clearly, for example, in the Arctic, where the risks are much, much greater. I don't know about you, I was always amazed to see in the Gulf these placid, calm waters for the response operations. It's not placid, calm waters in the Arctic. Imagine if there were a spill up there. Much, much harder to respond to. People talk about a de facto moratorium, but that's just a delay in making sure we do it right. And who can be against drilling safely?
One thing really is clear, though, and that is that we will use oil. We will continue to use oil. We will and must continue to use gas, which a lot of the drilling in the Gulf and some in Alaska and other places is for gas too. Even with expanded operations in the Marcellus Shale and places like that, we still will need these fossil fuels to help us, in many cases, drive our cars and live our lives, and in many cases also bridge ourselves from dirtier fossil fuels to cleaner fossil fuels.
But you're okay with these heightened safety regulations. I mean, let's talk about how costly and onerous they are as far as jobs and possibly
Right.
gasoline prices.
Even the administration itself admits in its Federal Register notice on these rules that they're going to be costly. They just say it's not going to be too costly, so don't worry about it. Well, the problem with that approach is that, again, the major oil companies generally don't can absorb those costs in the drilling and in the labor costs and things like that. The people who are hurt most by it are drillers who are independent operators who are really working mostly in the Gulf. The Gulf of Mexico is a small part of major oil companies' operations, but there are people and companies whose livelihood is created through operations
and some
in the
rigs
Gulf.
have already left. I mean, Peter, what about the jobs issue?
I was going to say there are 10 times as many people working in the tourism industry in the Gulf as there are in the oil industry, and those are the people who are really hurt by the accidents and the spills like the BP Horizon, the Deepwater Horizon. And you know, this whole notion of costs, we think that the only costs that are relevant are the costs to the oil companies. How about the cost to the fishermen who lost their jobs? How about the cost to the whole tourism industry? How about the cost to the ecosystem?
Okay, we're going to have to just end this part of our conversation. I'm sorry, Peter and Frank. We are going to be back to talk a little bit more about some other issues. I want to thank you guys for talking with us about offshore drilling, and we'll see you again in just a few minutes. And coming up on Energy Now, more mix as our panel returns to take on Google's big move into offshore wind transmission, as well as the EPA's decision to allow more ethanol in gasoline. And later, a look at when you could be pumping more ethanol into your tank.
Take dead aim.
And a Democratic governor and Senate candidate takes aim at his own party's climate bill literally.